Welcome once again to Dotwave. My name is John Wells, and I'm your host. The next 2 episodes on this show are very near and dear to me because they feature a very near and dear friend of mine named Olivier Egli, who performs as Nundale. It seems like every time you and I talk, this is one of my favorite things, is that we don't talk about music, but we talk about like the mindset and the deeper stuff and the like what I think is the real stuff behind creative process. And I just love these conversations. So I'll warn the listener right now that this will be tangents only and probably not a lot of earthly grounded stuff.
A journey to the insides.
That's right. That's right.
Intestines of art.
That's exact. Man, that's what I should change all my tagline, all my stuff like for the podcast and call it like Journey into the Intestines of Art.
Sad thing is, I would totally watch and listen to that.
That's not a sad thing. That's a wonderful, that's what makes you, man.
Let's do it.
Okay, so here I sit with Olivier Egli, also known as Nundale.
Hello.
Now, why don't you, one thing that I've always wanted to ask you was, what was some of the first music which you heard that really turned you on? Like, I want to make music. I want to be a musician. What was that? What was the initial spark?
I think I recall sitting in the back of my dad's car, and he had some like shitty Swiss radio station on, and it was like this weird bass line playing. It sounded like unlike anything I had heard before, but it had this like mechanical character. It was like digging. It was just like going do 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 do, and I was like, "What is that?" For whatever reason, it just sounded so like beautiful and like so shocking to me. And then I found out like, that electronic music just kind of like that was my thing, and I was like maybe 7 years old, and my dad had already like. He had forced me to take drum lessons at the age of 5. And my mom, just to kind of balance that out, sent me to piano lessons at the age of 6. So I already had a little bit, like of a musical understanding. But I was not into the whole Pink Floyd stuff, that I was forced to play, or like the Bach sonatines and all that. It was all just kind of like too organic to me, too swingy. But then when I heard this mechanical music, I got like infected. And my dad bought me cassette tapes of like weird like electronic artists. And next thing was Depeche Mode, and then I was hooked. Depeche Mode was really like the gateway into like my popular electronic music like era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved them too.
Loved it. Oh my God.
I
had everything.
Yeah. Depeche Mode, same as New Order, they really like strung us along. Remember all those like EPs and just like tons of EPs and singles? Smiths did that too.
Yeah.
And and it was like all of us like collector geeks. I was buying all these EPs for the B-sides, and they were just killing us, man.
Yeah, but it's to this day, I have to reference myself to those early Depeche Mode times, because I think in their music, more than any other music of that time, I could feel an urge to escape. Like it was the music. They made the music because they needed to go someplace else. And in looking back, there's this amazing documentary. I think it's called something like Britannia and Synth. I think it's on Netflix. It really just showcases early 80s synth wave and synth pop movement in Great Britain. And it was a harsh time, like the industrial times, like chimneys everywhere, dark, cold, just the way we imagine that country to be, right?
Yeah.
And that forces people into like an artistic corner of expression, because they have to find refuge. They have to kind of escape that. And I think that's what I kind of heard in their music. And to me, it sounded so melancholically, mechanically beautiful. And I
Yeah.
wanted to recreate that. And I wanted to have that around me. I think that was really like the first nail to my coffin.
I spent a lot of my childhood, like in the UK. I don't know if we've talked about that. My dad was a historian and we traveled over there a lot. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah. And a lot of that like gray sky, working class. And then think about like, like the Hacienda scene, New Order, Factory Records, Joy Division,
Yeah.
Manchester, Sheffield, all these scenes. Like, it's totally what you're saying. Like, these people are like, they were in real working class areas.
Right.
And it just sounds like it,
Yeah.
It just sounds like it. There's a feeling of like, there's kind of a melancholy, which which I think speaks to like the angsty high school kid, which I for sure was, I didn't fit in with the jocks. I was buying clothes from the thrift store so I could look kind of fucked up and kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like identified with punk rock, but not with like Black Flag and that kind of punk rock. It was more like I like identified with the mentality more. I mean, I definitely liked punk rock, but I was much more into Depeche Mode, New Order, Joy Division, Susie and the Banshees, Cocteau Twins.
Yeah.
Early Cure, the Smiths.
I totally agree. I think that's the reason why, in terms of musical innovation, the UK still beats any other country.
I agree.
In absolute and in relative numbers, which is like we stand no chance. But that's really like a cultural phenomena where people just find a gateway for their genius because they need that gateway. It's almost like they have no choice, and that breeds talent and genius.
I totally agree. I mean, when you're looking up at a dark sky, and like like row house, like estates.
How do you explain something like Portishead? How do you explain something like Massive Attack?
Or Cocteau Twins, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the density in those specific cities, it's just like it cannot be a coincidence. It's just, and that to me, it's just like a visual representation of a musical quality that has always touched me. Like I was so glad I could look from the outside in, and not be part, of that depression, but I rolled myself in it,
Yeah.
I had this like noble way of being part of the darkness from my safe home in Switzerland, right? Well, yeah, this is just how we were born and raised. It's like you're allowed to be depressed while playing your records.
Yeah.
But once you turn it off, please be a happy kid again.
No doubt, man.
Well, yeah.
That's so funny. I mean, I had like the same experience in, Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's like, this was not, Manchester.
Yeah.
At all. We'd go to the import record store to find the good stuff. This was not, was not playing on the radio.
Yeah.
There was no cool club, where this was going on at 1 a.m. at some cool warehouse party.
Right. Oh yeah. It was hard to source the good stuff.
Yeah.
It was hard. That made it even better, though.
It did. It did.
You feel special once you found a gem. You're like, oh, mine.
But also, didn't it make you kind of a music snob? Like, I recall.
Oh, yeah.
Like back to, what I was saying about all those Smith singles and all those Depeche Mode singles. Then they release like a greatest hits album, like the Smiths did Louder Than Bombs. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like years of collecting B-sides and singles. And now like the world had it and it was thought of as like a greatest hits, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? These are all like the hard singles I dug for and had the 7 inches for. And then they become big.
Yeah.
And then my inner music snob comes out of like, man, I liked them when nobody knew who they were. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's terrible. You know, same thing
Yeah.
happened with The Cure, you know, with Staring at the
Yeah.
Sea singles. It's like those were all like things that we had collected and now were like available as a quote greatest hits.
It's kind of problematic. I mean, I totally know what you mean. I have that with Boards of Canada because I
Totally,
keep
totally.
referring myself to like I'm the most avid fan of theirs, um, which I'm sure I'm not because the Boards of Canada fans are fucking freaks and they know things. I mean, that are not even there, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I discovered them by accident in 1997, so it's been 22 years rolling with them. Just basically, just still praying to somehow run into them while I'm visiting Scotland and seeing them perform live maybe once in my lifetime. But I have always kind of tried not to be snobby about it, being like all those new school kids that kind of discover Boards of Canada is like, oh, it's such a cool drone ambient band. I'm like, no, that's fucking IDM, and you got to be one of the real ones. If you didn't know them in the 90s, you're not like deserving of them, right? I have to bite my tongue. I do in conversations online when I go and try to source new stuff and I see like maybe, like a 20-year-old is like, oh, this is great techno. And I'm like, should I say something?
Yeah, right.
I'm like, you know what? No. And that's just, wow. It's like almost a grand gesture of mine. And I feel like, oh, I'm so giving.
I'm not going to be a total prick right now. I'm just going to let you
Exactly.
call it techno.
Yeah, I will
right.
let you call it techno, even though it rips apart my insides. But that's okay.
So
Die
you
a
and
horrible
I,
death.
you and I have a real affinity and love for this early beginning IDM. I mean, it's just there. What is it about
1992, 93? Alltaker started like actually way earlier than we think. There was also the Black Dog Collective, which was later Plaid.
Plaid, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which are my two all-time heroes for sticking to their guns, just like holding on to what they're about. But what was it? I think it is hip hop made an incredible, like it was an incredible journey and moment to be part of in the hip hop world during the early 90s to like the mid 90s, which I'm like fortunate enough to have been part of. Like I used to make beats for like local hip hop bands or like wannabe hip hop bands. The French hip hop culture was exploding. The German hip hop culture was like starting to really like get mature, and were like new sounds being like sourced. Wu-Tang brought a completely new like set of sounds into the game, and there were just these smart kids who knew how to take what was happening in the hip hop culture, what was like happening in the rave and techno culture, and kind of bridge those styles with just really smart experimental way of using very basic gear. Because I mean, 1993, 94, that was 10 years after the adventure of MIDI. But I mean, DAWs were not really around, and everything was still pretty basic. So these kids kind of like fused all that with super basic equipment, and that's where experimentation started to define that new music that was kind of between hip hop and typical mainstream electronica. And that's where I was like, holy shit, wow.
Yeah.
That British culture of like kind of sinister sound texture with a little bit of hip hop in the percussion, but also with like some like sounds that I knew from techno, created a completely new ecosphere that I'm like still completely hooked on today.
Yeah. It's just crazy. Like, I don't want to let it go either.
Oh no. I will not. I refuse. It was funny. It was a time, 1995. I released my first record under a terrible label that was called Go Progressive, and it was like some acid techno stuff. And I remember back then I had already played raves for 3 years. Okay, so I started like playing raves at maybe the age of 14, 13, 14. My father took me to the rave, waited backstage for me to be done, helped me take everything off stage, and drove me straight back home because they knew, right? The rave scene in Switzerland was getting crazy flooded with like drugs and all kinds of shit.
But
So
your
I was
dad
just,
took you. That's beautiful, man.
he took me. He carried my mixing desk. I carried my Atari computer and the little synth that I had. I just raved away for a good 45 to 60 minutes, and then we went back home. And but it was not satisfying. I was never happy. I was never happy doing it. I was just doing it because I could, and because it was almost like a hobby. You can go out there, you make 1,000, 2,000 people happy for an hour. You get paid a couple $100, which at that age is big fucking deal because what does it mean? More gear, right?
Right, right.
When IDM started to like pour into my life, I knew, all right, this is the next big thing I want to be part of. And what I have to mention, a very, very strong influence of mine to this day, and I'm still trying to figure out how to, celebrate it more, is electronic body music. Like Front 242 completely turned my world upside down when I was in high school.
Yeah, that was earlier. That was 80s, yeah.
Yeah, it completely turned everything upside down because it was like Depeche Mode, but with a harder edge. It was more demanding. It was more like aggressive, which is something I have always liked about electronic music, that it could ramp up to a certain energy. It had almost like a punkish quality to it without being made with traditional punk instruments. And it had this association, like with like right-wing movements and whatever, which is completely total utter bullshit. But it shows the kind of energy that it was able to evoke. And I totally bought into that. And I was like, man, how can I fuse all this? How can I bring together my love for industrial music, for synthwave and synth pop and EBM and techno and hip hop? So you kind of create a monster there, right? You're like between all these chairs, and you go through several musical identity crises because it's a lot to take in, and you're like, wait a minute, who am I amongst all these creatures, right?
Yeah.
And that journey is still ongoing.
What about Nitzareb? They were great too.
Love it. And
they were so good.
They're touring again.
I know, and they're touring with Bostich, our friend here in Southern California.
And Serchai.
Amazing.
They just finished an epic tour right now as a Nitzareb product.
But see, they were, and same with Front 242. Like this was industrial, but also not as sharp as stuff like Skinny Puppy or like Ministry. So there's a little bit more. There's a little bit more electro going on with stuff like Nitzareb and Front 242.
Yeah. Oh, that was Frontline Assembly and Clinic. But I think like it's really a lot of them used it as. No, and don't get me wrong, not in a bad way, as like a gateway for propaganda, for almost political conviction, which is hip hop is nothing else but that. Good hip hop, right? Especially rap. Rap in the beginnings, I mean, it was loaded with messages.
But also good politics too.
Not, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. We completely forget that the metal scene is full of incredibly well educated people who use metal as a vehicle for like meaningful conversation. We're very quick to label, a conversation according to the noise level of a certain type of music, but that's bullshit. Just because music gets louder or harsher probably should indicate that the message is more urgent. Which in a lot of early Front 242 lyrics, there was this guy, I think he was called Richard 23, that was the singer.
Mm-hmm.
His messages were very simple, so you could easily repeat them, but man, they worked. They worked, like it was about, like, like uprising violence, and like political and cultural disagreement, and like inequalities and all that in a very basic form, but with these marching rhythms, it just fucking sunk in with every
Yeah.
beat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. So for me, the '90s, I think, is still it's the decade of confusion and raw creativity, and I cannot let go. I cannot still live in the '90s.
There was something that Autechre was doing that I tried so hard to get in that place. And I don't mean like trying to copy them or sound like them, but I was working in Cubase with software synths and samplers. Then I also had a hardware studio, with MIDI sequencers and MIDI samplers. And there was just this crackling, crispy thing, which they could do that I could never get close to. And again, not trying to sound like them, because you just couldn't. But there was some kind of a crispy crackle thing. That's the only way I can describe it. And now working with modular, I can get in the ballpark. And that's so satisfying to be like, 10 miles, from them is better than like, 20,000 miles from them. You know what I mean? And with software, now they're using Macs and they're completely off the off the deep end. These guys were using modular before I understood it at all, and that was the way they were getting these sounds, was with hardware.
I'm convinced. I'm convinced with their level of desire for experimentation and the kind of vision they have, they will use any kind of tool
For sure.
to
Get
to get where they want to go, or where Autechre stands for, and that's what I admire. That's why I played. I mean, I met those guys a couple times during their tours in Europe. Like I've seen them probably 7-8 times in Switzerland alone, and I was lucky enough to talk to them twice. And it baffles me to this day that the extreme organic quality of their music, that sometimes those chord changes that go from like bright yellow to this like completely heartbroken deep green like quality with this effortlessness, is mostly done with soft synths. I mean, and they will not even speak about it, and that's what I realize is really the key to it, is because it does not matter to them.
Right.
They see past that tool that's at their fingers, but they hold on to the vision at like any cost. And that vision, they've stayed true to their music for a quarter century, and there's no sign that they will ever let go of it, because that's them. That's why I think that a belief is the strongest power in art, because it just surpasses any kind of tool limitation or any kind of like tool superfluousness you might have, because it gives you a direction, And I think that's just why I'm still listening to the same 3 or 4 artists over and over. And it's so hard for me to discover new artists that have the same kind of quality and depth where I realized, holy shit, the level of honesty, even though it might not be accessible for many, they don't care. And that's such an honorable, amazing place to get to, because you just outgrow any like ego and outside need for gratification, because you're just making your thing with whatever, with a fucking pen, with a pen and a piece of paper, or like a tabletop, or like a microphone, or a soft synth, or a giant modular system. Yeah, I think that's, for me, that's the big takeaway. That's why I'm like in love with those artists.
You and I talked once about artistic intention versus sometimes how I feel is like, I don't know how it comes out of me, and this is how it comes out. And I don't think about it. There's certainly no message. I couldn't explain like, where did this come from or why it sounds like this. Yeah. Like, how does that work with your creative process and how you make things? Like you talk about like honesty, and for me, I don't know how to. That doesn't make sense to me in how I make music.
Yeah.
So how does that work with you and your process?
I think the creative process is the hardest bit of the part of the creation itself, of making art, is to be able to let go, of an idea that you obsess over that is maybe not your own. I probably need to clarify. I used to be so obsessed with like Boards of Canada, and like Plaid, as I said, different warp artists, that somehow they always managed to creep into my music, because I was kind of chasing, I was trying to reproduce what I was loving out there. And while doing that, I completely ignored the fact that I could have my own voice. So, like I spent a lot of time just figuring out how I could make my chords work the same way as Plaid's, or like a bass line just cutting through the mix, just like in Autechre's tracks. And as I did that, I realized that my music was becoming technically more interesting, but from an original standpoint, unoriginal, right? Because, that totally sounds like this, sounds like that. And I realized that those were the tracks that did not give me any fulfillment or satisfaction. They were more like, pay your dues in like figuring out how to do stuff. And then once you know it, completely let go of it. And that's kind of like the process I've been going through in the last couple of years, is like, how can I, suck up as many ideas as I can out there and be like completely inspired by amazing artists, and then go in the studio and let it all go, so that I'm a complete, total blank piece of paper, and anything that I do comes from within and not from without. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, let my fingers glide over the keyboard and patch up something that maybe does not sound like something that this guy would do or that guy would do, but let's see where it takes me. And I think that's where subconsciousness starts to like guide your artistic process, versus consciousness trying to kind of like fuck with it, And that's why, like, I released 2 EPs last year, and I mean, I really like them because they kind of were like witness to my journey to the US and letting go of my former life. But in listening to them, I realized that there are a lot of influences that I have to learn to shed, and that I shed over the past couple of months because I had a lot of time to figure out my production process. And I realized, holy hell, when I go to my studio with a clear intention, I end up with nothing. I chuck everything. When I go in there, because I just want to follow my bliss, because I want to create, because I want to be guided by what's inside of me, magic happens. And I mean, I don't mean this in like an arrogant way. It's just like, suddenly something just an accident, an apparent accident happens, and I get locked into a new pattern that I have not heard before, and I'm like, this is creation. This is what I want. But it's not. I mean, it's 1 out of 5 times that I can tap into it, 1 out of 5 times. I want to make it 2 out of 5 times by the end of the year. But it's harsh. Letting go is really harsh and hard, because I think mastery comes from knowing what you're doing and then forgetting about it.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And the forgetting part, it's just like, getting rid of like stuff is hard because we're easily influenced, right? We're just manipulated. We manipulate ourselves, and art cannot have that. Art cannot have that. We need original art. We need it.
Mm-hmm. But I think music has a magic way of kind of seating in the back of our minds. So we're not showing up saying, I'm going to grab my guitar. I want to sound like Jimi Hendrix. I want to sound like Mark Arm from Mudhoney.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of goes into our subconscious and into our blood, into our bones. It comes from a place of our own, but it also comes from what we're inspired by. I grew up on punk rock.
Yeah.
Got into electronic. Always loved jazz. My parents gave me folk music. And like all of this is kind of this blending, like self-proclaimed like musicologist brain going forward trying to make music now. So
right.
I have no idea who I am. Like my best music, like you're saying too, is where I rarely have like intention where I go in and I'm like, I want to make something like this. That almost never happens.
Yeah.
It's usually that I find some sounds and I stumble forward into the dark,
You're a mature musician. I really like to be able to just drop the ball and just like be willing not to know. That's huge, not wanting to know. And then as you do it, discover. I think that is the most honest way of like tapping into your own resource. Because in the end, we're like, I believe that. Maybe that's a bit far-fetched for many, but I don't care. I believe that I'm a vessel for whatever energy travels through me. So I need to be open to that.
Absolutely.
And that energy is super original. It's super original. And I wanna tap into that. I want to open the floodgates for that energy,
Mm-hmm.
and that energy keeps changing, and I change along with it. I don't hold on to certain ways because, no, I want this, no, I want that. I like open myself every morning when I wake up, like I look up and I'm like, all right, what is it going to be today? And sometimes it's nothing. And sometimes it's everything. And I sit there in my studio, and sometimes I turn everything off 5 minutes after I turn it on because I'm like, no, not today.
It just isn't there. Yeah.
It's not there. And that's fine. And I believe, like, it's the same idea as in meditation. It's not about fighting that thought. It's about accepting it and then letting it go. That's what I meant when I said before, like, to be able to let go, it makes an imprint of you. You take it up, it forms who you are, and then you let it go so you can be original again. I mean, Aborts of Canada and Plaid and Flying Lotus and all that they will always be part of my own musical heritage. But I want to foster my own voice, I cannot deny my past. I cannot, and I will not. It's great, Here and there you find references, and that's perfectly fine, to other musical artists. But it's the fact that I bring my own DNA into it that makes it like original. And that's what we need. Like in the end, I'm just on the quest for the original because I don't listen to radio much. If possible, not at all. I don't watch cable TV, and I rarely ever watch TV series for more than like 2 or 3 episodes because I'm fascinated when someone finds a new original way of telling a story. That's really all I care about, to find something new, because I feel like we're so overloaded with always ever the same thing again.
Yeah.
And we need to tap into that original resource that we have, and we all have it. That's a crazy thing. We all have it.
Doesn't
But
it
we
like
can,
seriously,
huh?
doesn't it like break your heart when people say like I don't have a creative bone in my body,
Oh yeah.
and they look at people who do creative stuff as like
Oh
these
yeah.
like elite wizards, and I'm like, man, that's such a heartbreaker because
Here's the
you
thing.
know,
I'm married to a wonderful woman who, for 5 of the 7 years of our marriage, embraced the fact that I was the creative guy and she's just like, that manager type of person, right? And I never bought into it. I refused to dive into that conversation because my view was clearly that she was highly creative, which she demonstrated in conversations. But to her, that was not like, no, that's not real creativity.
but see, these people are talking about I can't make music, I can't make fine art.
Yeah, but that's a definition that we have, which is bind to beliefs that were imprinted upon us during school, in classrooms, which are, a classroom by itself is the antithesis of art. It's like, let's all sit in a row and all learn the same fucking shit, Quantize, I call that quantization of reality. It's like you start with something that's round and perfectly shaped. You go to school, you come out as a square that's exactly 9 by 9 pixels. So you fit into the grid that is our society. But once you step out of it, you realize, holy shit, wait a minute. And that's the matrix, right? You step out of that matrix, you realize, oh, I got to unlearn all this. I got to undo all this to really find my own voice. You cannot be quantized as a human being. You cannot. Nature is not quantization. The pixel grid is an invention that we made so we can grasp, a quantized version of reality. But that's not where we want to go. That's not where our luck, our happiness, our fulfillment lies. We're rounded, softly curved beings. We want to like spread out in beauty and not in like with edges and, I'm not a fucking square.
Wow. Okay, so you've reached the end of part 1 with Olivier Egli, who is Nundale. Please come back next week for part 2 with Olivier, where we actually listen to some of his music and talk about how he creates. My name is John O. Wells, and thank you for listening to Dotwave.